Easter is an important holiday in the mountains of Appalachia. A lot of people, a majority of the people I would say, who call the Appalachian Mountains home are believers. They believe in God. They believe that God sent His only begotten Son, Jesus, to die for them on the cross, and that in 3 days He rose. He rose from the grave again to conquer death and conquer our sins. So it plays a very huge role in the fabric of Appalachia and people's personal lives. And I have a video that I did last year where I kind of talk about the traditions, share an old story from my great Aunt Hazel. In those days they called it Resurrection Day, not Easter. So you can check that video out. I will link to it for you. But today I want to share two legends about Easter in the mountains of Appalachia. Now this first one goes well beyond Appalachia, so I'm sure that you're familiar with it too. And it's the symbolic story of the dogwood representing Christ's crucifixion and Him rising again. I was just a wee girl, probably, I don't even know how old, when someone pointed out to me that the dogwood blooms, if you look at them, they look like a cross. The center symbolizes the crown of thorns that Christ wore and when He was being crucified. And then even on the petals there's a darkness, and that would symbolize the blood. If I had to guess who told me that, it might have been when I was a young girl at church. One of my Sunday school teachers for many years was Eunice Martin. She's no longer with us, but she was a great Sunday school teacher, a great woman, great person, very sweet. And about once a year, she would load us up in her vehicle and take us up on the mountain, her Sunday school class, and then she would teach her class there, being out in nature in that wonderful beautiful place there just down the road from the church. That was her home, where she'd grown up, where she lived. I don't know that she grew up there, I better not say that part, but where she lived, her and her husband, where she'd raised her kids. So it was just right down the road on her property, and we would drive up on this old road into the mountains, and she would have church, have our Sunday school there. So she's probably the one that told me about the dogwood. But anyway, it was only after I was an adult and I was married, Matt's mother, Miss Cindy, she had been privileged to have her grandmother, so it would be Matt's great-grandmother's, Miss Cindy's grandmother Dolly, her collection of postcards and photos and things that she'd kept over the years. And in there was a postcard that told the legend of the dogwood. So I'm going to read that to you now. So it says, "There is a legend that at the time of the crucifixion, the dogwood had been the size of the oak and other forest trees. So firm and strong was the tree that it was chosen as the timber for the cross. To be used thus for such a cruel purpose greatly distressed the tree, and Jesus, nailed upon it, sensed this, and in His gentle pity for all sorrow and suffering said to it, Because of your regret and pity for my suffering, never again shall the dogwood tree grow large enough to be used as a cross. Henceforth it shall be slender and bent and twisted, and its blossoms shall be in the form of a cross, 2 long and 2 short petals, and in the center of the outer edge of each petal there will be nail prints, brown with rust and stained with red, and in the center of the flower will be a crown of thorns, and all who see it will remember." So that's the legend of the dogwood. And it is interesting that the dogwood tree typically blooms, in my area anyway, of Appalachia, at Easter. That's when it blooms. So the trees here around my mountain holler house here are beginning to bloom. They're almost in full bloom, the dogwoods. And again, right on time, over the weekend we had freezing temperatures and snow flurries. So right in time for dogwood winter. That's something that occurs every year too. So that's an interesting legend that I really like, and one that is common here in Appalachia, and probably where you're at too. So the other one, I was not familiar with it until I was researching for the Blind Pig and the Acorn many years ago. What I was familiar with was the little object it's talking about is a fairy cross. So if you've ever seen a fairy cross, it's a little, I'll put a picture so you can see it. That would be easier, so you can see what it looks like. And you see it's a rock formation that actually looks like a cross. I don't know, I was not married or anything, but maybe in high school or something. And the first one I seen, Pap in those days hauled fuel, so he was a truck driver. he hauled like kerosene and heater fuel, more that kind of stuff. Not in the past he'd done long haul like gasoline, but these were the days where he was driving a smaller truck. So he'd be the one that might come fill up your oil tank at your house. But someone down in, I think it was down in Hanging Dog, give him one of the little ferry crosses and told him, you know, I don't know what he told him about it. I don't think he told him about this legend that I'm going to share with you. But anyway, he brought it home and he gave it to me because he knew that I liked rocks. I have no clue where it's at. I've lost it somewhere along the way. I wish I did, but I remember him bringing it home and giving it to me. And he did tell me that the gentleman told him that they were really important to the Cherokee Indians. The area that we live in, that was the area that Cherokee was very prominent in, and you know, I don't live very far from actually the Cherokee reservation, so I do remember Pap telling me that. But this, what I'm going to read to you, comes from John Paris. He's one of my favorite authors when it comes to Appalachia, but he wrote about southern Appalachian Mountains, specifically western North Carolina where I'm at, so that's mostly what he wrote about. But what he writes I find to ring true for all of Appalachia. But this one, he wrote for the Asheville Citizen-Times. He had an article for many, many years, and then those articles he put in book form. So that's what the one I'm reading today come from Mountain Bread, Tales by John Paris. So as he would do that, he would travel around all around western North Carolina, and then he would note where he was, whatever kind of subject he was writing about in the article, he would note where it come from. So, you know, a lot of them are out around Asheville or Sylva, but every once in a while there's one in Murphy, or this one, the Ferry Cross one that I'm going to read you, is actually from Brasstown. So he's got Brasstown noted that that's where it took place. So I'm going to read it to you. Even the fairies in the Great Smokies wept when Christ died, and the tears they spilled turned to stone and formed tiny crosses, symbols of the crucifixion. That is the story the old Indians tell. For the skeptical, the Cherokee will show you the tiny crosses to prove the story they tell, a story that has been handed down through almost 2,000 years of telling. No human hand carved these crosses, which lie scattered upon the earth near here, and nowhere else in all the Cherokee land will you find them except at this one spot in the Clay County hills. I first heard the story of the ferry crosses many years ago, but it was only recently that I went searching for the spot where the strange miracle occurred. A friend of mine, Lynn Galt, led me to the spot, and I have 100 or more of the tiny crosses which I picked up to prove they do exist. But unless you know what you are seeking, you probably would never notice them, for they are the color of the earth, and at first glance they look like so many pebbles. The little crosses only become significant when the story about them is told. And the story the Cherokee tell is a story that rightfully belongs in the treasury of world folklore and myth and legend. My people, said Arson Thompson, have told the story through the ages about the crosses. It is a beautiful story. Arson is a Cherokee Indian preacher who plays the role of Elias Boudant, the Indian missionary, in the Cherokee Indian drama Until These Hills. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Arson's people have always had a reverence for the supernatural, and the original Cherokee attitude toward the great mystery, the eternal, was quite simple. The Cherokee had no temples, no shrines, no idols. The sun and the moon and the stars, they were his trinity. The lightning and the wind, the thunder and the rain, provoked both reverence and fear, for these were only messengers of the great man above. So it is not difficult to see how the Cherokee would accept the story of the crosses and how they came to be. Yes, said Arson, it is a strange story, and this is what the old men told me when I was a boy. When the world was young, there lived in these mountains a race of little people. They were spirit people, like the fairies you read about. Now one day, when these little people had gathered to dance and sing around a pool deep in the woods, a spirit messenger arrived from a strange city far, far away in the land of the dawn. But soon the dancing and singing stopped, for the messenger brought them sad tidings. The messenger told them Christ was dead. The little people were silent, then they were sad, and as they listened to the story of how Christ had died on the cross, they wept, and their tears fell upon the earth and turned into small stones. But the stones were neither round nor square. Each was in the form of a beautiful little cross. Hundreds of tears fell to earth and turned into tiny stone crosses, but the little people were so dazed and heartbroken they did not notice what was happening. So with the joy gone from their hearts, they wandered away into the forest to their homes. But around the spot where they had been dancing and singing, where they had stopped to shed their tears, the ground was covered with these symbols of the death of Christ. "What happened to the little people?" I asked. "Are they still here in the mountains? Has anyone ever seen them?" "No one knows for sure what happened to them," said Arsene. "I first heard the story when I was a boy, and the old men of the tribe who told it to me said that after that day the little people were never seen again. But the old men said that on still nights you could hear them whispering along the river, and that when there was a gentle breeze, their sighs could be heard in the tall trees." There is a wealth of stories in Cherokee mythology about the crosses, but they all originate with how they came into being. There was one belief among the Cherokee that the crosses had the power to render the owner invisible at will. According to one story, they were told where to find the stones as a reward for their goodness and kindness to all people. They were the immortals who dwelled in the fastness of the mountains. They had their own townhouses under the Cherokee mounds and under the hills. They were spirit people who could make themselves invisible at will after they had become the possessor of one of the tiny crosses. In some instances, the tiny crosses were supposed to give the owner the power of diving into the ground and then coming up again among the enemy to scalp and kill with sudden terror and destruction. The crosses have found their way into rare collections of gems and artifacts. Several years ago, an Asheville jeweler displayed a small collection of these crosses, which are not much larger than those on a rosary. In some instances, they have been polished and ground to beautiful symmetry and mounted in gold and used as watch charms or good luck emblems. So that was from John Paris talking about the legend of the fairy crosses. Now, he says they're only found in Brasstown. I know that that's not true. I know in Fannin County, Georgia, you can find them, and I'm sure there's probably other places too. But they are definitely located here in Brasstown. When the girls were in high school, I believe it was a friend, he's a friend, but through the school took the class, Bob Grove, he took the girls and their whole class to look for them, and they come home with some of them here in Brasstown. So it is a beautiful legend, that one and the one of the Dogwood, but both showing how important Easter and the crucifixion of Christ is to the people who call Appalachia home. So I hope if you've heard of these legends that you'll leave a comment and let me know about that. Or maybe you have a different legend relating to Easter that you could share. Please do if you have one. And as always, I hope you'll just continue to drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia, which includes a lot of folklore, legends, and of course religious connections here in the mountains of Appalachia.